It's the Farmer to Farmer podcast, episode 154, and this is your host, Chris Blanchard. Today's show is a repeat of an episode I recorded in the spring of 2015 with Richard Wiswall of Cate Farm in Plainfield, Vermont. Cate Farm has sold produce through a CSA, farmers market, and wholesale accounts and has been in business since 1981. Richard is also well known for his excellent book, The Organic Farmer's Business Handbook. We take a hard look at the business side of vegetable farming with some quick pointers for how you can start to understand the cost of production and marketing on your farm to better inform decision-making on your own operation. We also take a look at framing both big picture and day-to-day decisions on your farm. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is generously supported by Haas Tools, the complete solution for all your market farming tools and supplies. From wheel hose, precision seeders, heavy-duty seed trays, drip irrigation, and organic pest control, they've got you covered. Get free shipping and outstanding customer service at HaasTools.com. And by Local Food Marketplace, helping farms and food hubs around North America implement easy-to-use online ordering systems that integrate with a full management system for order packing, invoicing, and payment processing. Contact localfoodmarketplace.com to learn more. And by Vermont Compost Company, founded by organic crop growing professionals committed to meeting the need for high quality compost and compost-based living soil mixes for certified organic plant production. VermontCompost.com. Richard, I've given our listeners just a little bit of an overview, but we'd like to hear more from you in your own words about your farm and its history and your history with farming. Can you tell us about the kind of scale that you're operating on, how you grow your crops, where and how you market, and how you got into the business?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I've been at Cate Farm here in central Vermont, outside of Montpelier, Vermont, for the last 34 years. And my wife and I co-farm it. We have 22 acres in cultivated land. We have a lot more in woods, and we have 7 96-foot-long greenhouses. And our business has changed over the years, but we've done everything from doing 18 acres of row crops and 4 acres of cover crops, plus the greenhouses. We did a CSA during the 1990s for 7 years, which we just really love, but stopped for different reasons. I personally did a farmer's market for 25 years, just stopped recently, and we had, again, I should just preface this saying that as I'm getting older, I just don't want to work as hard, and so my wife and I made a conscious decision to grow fewer things and not hire as many people and do as much as we used to do. And so
fewer less variety and the same number of acres, or when you say fewer things, are you actually shrinking the operation?
Well, let's see, more concentration on the greenhouses. So we're still working full time and still hiring people, but not as many people, but definitely less variety. In fact, when one of the decisions to stop the CSA was because our crew chief was going to take a leave of absence to have a baby, and we said, well, maybe we'll shave off the CSA in a farmer's market, not have to grow everything all the time. And so then we decided just to concentrate on fewer crops and more of them. And so now we're doing the same kind of thing, except we're just not doing as much. And so when a market opportunity comes along, we might just say no to it instead of taking it on and getting bigger.
Right.
So, right now our business is, the 7 greenhouses. Of the 7 greenhouses, we have 2 that are used for seedling production for our own use, but mainly to sell to other home gardeners in the area. And then the other 5 we use for in-ground production of vegetables, 3 for tomatoes and 2 for greens. So we can rotate the tomatoes around, not quite every other year, but 3 out of 5. And then in our fields, we have maybe a couple acres of row crops now instead of, usually we were doing 12 acres or so of mixed vegetables, but no longer that anymore just because it's, again, too many balls to juggle in the air. And so that works out great. So it actually works out very nicely for time-wise because we're incredibly busy during the spring, and then once seedlings get done, our greenhouse tomatoes come on, and then once our greenhouse tomatoes start tapering off, our fall root crops come in. And so it's spread out very evenly. And so my wife and I, Sally, can, do most of the work ourselves with some part-time help as well. But, in the old days, we used to hire 5 full-time people from, April through November, and then maybe somebody during the winter to help out wash, because we store root crops all winter long. And now it's, it's just less people around. So it's a little bit smaller business, I guess, to answer your question.
Okay. And do you feel like to get to the smaller business, you had to go through that big, expansive, massively diversified, larger operation to get to where you are now? Or was that part of building what you have?
No, I think what happened, I think it just has to do with age, Chris. I don't know how old you are, but I'm pushing 60, and it's like, it's just different because, when I was young, the sky's the limit, and I would work long hours and loved every bit of it and would take any number of things on. And just as I get older, I just value my free time more. And so I think, once we reach cruising altitude, maybe 10 or 15 years into it, we're at cruising altitude, and think the learning curve and the workload lessens off. And so once you're there, we could just keep going along like that. But we decided to actually, lower the altitude a little bit just because we didn't need to keep that pace up anymore. Yeah, so no, it's a benefit. I think it's a benefit of, working 34 years. We have a stable full of machinery and 7 greenhouses and, 3 barns and 2 coolers. We have everything in place, so we don't need to do any of that. So we can just kind of, use the existing equipment very easily. And it's a nice place to be, I must say. It took some work getting here, but for someone starting out, it's definitely a longer road to hoe just because you're still acquiring machinery and building infrastructure and learning the ropes as well.
Yeah, and of course, it's not even just the money that it takes to acquire the machinery, but just the time and intellectual energy for doing all of the things that are required with scaling up, I think is a real challenge.
Yeah, and I think it's a hard thing when I talk to new farmers or beginning farmers, and it's like, there's so many things you could spend money on, and there's so many different directions you can go, and that's part of the adventure. You choose what you want to do, and I guess my best advice is to do what you want to do, and to think about it ahead of time. And I've always been a proponent of like saying, push a pencil even on the back of an envelope just to see if your farming venture is going to look, financially feasible, and then if so, then move forward. And you'll never be able to buy everything you want all the time. And, the learning curve is going to be, steep on a lot of things. And that's part of the fun of it too, is learning about how to grow vegetables or herbs or flowers or whatever it is, or raise animals. And, not to look at it as look at it as a challenge, but it's a good challenge.
Well, and you even talked about, just in your experience on your farm, the changes that you've gone through over the years with the CSA, then the farmers market. I'm assuming that means some changes in crop mix, having to learn to grow some new things. It is, I think you never really hit that stasis. And even in the 14 years that I owned my farm, we went through so many different manifestations of what Rock Spring Farm actually looked like. What crops we were growing on, what crops we were focused on. You kind of have to keep probing and taking advantage of those new opportunities.
And that's a very good point. And I think that, when, I always think it's a great thing for people to plan ahead. But, you think at one point you're going to go from point A to point B, but then something comes along or the markets change, and all of a sudden you kind of go over to one direction and come back again. You might not end up at point B at all. And that's okay. Businesses are always in flux, and it's rare that you're just going to be doing the same thing year after year after year. Your markets change, your ability to grow certain things change, your scale up, it might be different. So all those things, it's a moving target. But what's great about it is that the farmer is in control of doing what they want to do, and not to be necessarily ruled by the marketplace, but do what you want to do and look for the market to support that.
I think it's something interesting about your scene out there in Vermont. I was just in Vermont last week.
I know I missed you. I'm sorry that we didn't connect.
I didn't put 2 and 2 together. I was actually in Montpelier, so I'm kind of thumping myself on the head, going, "Well, there was a missed opportunity," but not my first missed opportunity, and I'm sure it won't be my last. We, I did two workshops out there back to back, and I think we had 80 or 90 people at those two sessions, and about market farming. These were all market farmers, and I'm thinking they were an hour and a half apart. I mean, you guys have you've got some population density there in Vermont, but I mean, you can't turn around without running into a market farmer. And I'm really curious. I mean, how have you dealt with that? I think a lot of markets now, I know in the Twin Cities, we're starting to see like the CSA market is, people are talking about it being full. And I've noticed on Simon Huntley's CSA discussion group that he's got on Facebook that a lot of farmers there are asking that question. How did you adapt to that changing market? And I mean, again, you're in this very competitive space that has to be a lot different than where you were in 1980.
So like in 1981 is our first year. And back then there's very fewer farmers, but the market was much smaller. And so, we had a challenge just to find the market even with fewer growers. And then, over the decades, the market has grown, and at certain points very dramatically, and other points not as much, to the point where now there's a lot of people coming into a marketplace which is kind of not growing so much. And so there is a little bit of this, the lowest hanging fruit of the consumers that want to buy organic produce has already been picked. And so if a new grower comes on the scene, a lot of times that marketing pie doesn't really get any bigger. It just gets cut into different sized pieces or smaller pieces. And so, that you're basically a new, or not a new grower, growers tend to shuffle customers without actually getting new customers. And I don't think that's really good for everybody. I'm always an advocate of working cooperatively and, pooling resources and trying to work it out so we don't step on our neighbors' toes. I don't mind taking business from California, nothing against California, but it's just I'd much rather support all our local infrastructure as well as here. That said, there's a lot of people at farmers market, all selling lettuce and all selling tomatoes and everything else, and so it all tends to sugar off that we have our own customers, or it does sharpen our marketing and promotional skills just because we need to do that. But I think there is an issue of this cannibalism of the consumers that want to buy organic produce. And so what we need to do now is, either find, enlarge that marketplace so we're getting more people to come to, or to buy this food, or we reach out to sell to institutions or, people that may not buy it, or to try to find scale where we can maybe sell at a lower price point that we can then, be more competitive in a bigger marketplace. That, right now I'm actually working on this great project through NOFA Vermont, and we teamed up with 2 other NOFA states about doing cost of production for farmers. So we have 30 farmers in New England here that we're actually working with to determine cost of productions of 3 crops. We have a list of 10 crops and everybody picks 3, so there's a lot of overlap. And, part of it is to shine the light on the inner workings of a business, everything from how much it costs to market their produce through CSA deliveries or farmers market or farm stand or wholesale, and looking at their overhead expenses, but also just to look at how much it really takes to produce a case of squash or a bag of carrots or a bag of beets. And that is, tremendously important. It's like for people to know what it costs to grow their certain crops that they grow, and to know if the price that they're getting is actually going to be sufficient enough to make a profit. In general, you could look at it saying, well, it costs me, $1.25 to grow a head of lettuce. I need to charge $2 a head. But generally, there's a price out in the world that says, a head of lettuce goes for $1.50 wholesale and $2.50 retail, say, and
Right.
It's our job as farmers to produce the head of lettuce or whatever it may be under that market price. So then we can, have enough profit left over at the end of the year to support ourselves, pay our employees livable wages, save for retirement, put our kids through college, all that kind of thing. And maybe not work 80 hours a week to do it. So the idea with this cost of production project is, we're kind of uncovering these, profit centers that could be on your farm. And, a diversified vegetable farm might grow 30 different crops or maybe more. And they might have animals as well. And, there's a lot of moving pieces on a farm like that. And the best thing to do, when that's happening is to basically take, your top 1 to 5 sellers, and analyze the profitability of those, because that's what's bringing the most money into your bank account, you better be making money on those, or you could be hemorrhaging money. And the idea that if you do more than one thing, if you're not just growing 10 acres of carrots, but if you're doing 10 different vegetables or 5 species of animals, I can guarantee you that they're not equal profitability. I mean, it's just, there's no way it would be. And so of those, you want to focus on the ones that are more profitable, or find out the ones why things aren't profitable and either raise the price or try to lower expenses, or both.
I know that in my operation, we did carrots and beets. We did a lot of storage crops, and we were famous for our carrots. People loved Rock Spring Farm carrots, and it was a fun crop to produce. We had a girl one time at farmers market who started crying because we'd run out of carrots before her family got there. And I didn't feel good about making her cry, but I felt good about my carrots. And nobody gets that excited about beets. But when we actually sat down and ran some numbers on what our costs were, we found out that those carrots were a very successful crop from the customer standpoint, but we were barely breaking even on selling carrots in the wholesale marketplace. Whereas with beets, our cost of weeding was lower, and the cost of washing was so much lower that we were making bank on those.
Right.
And it was, but of course, I mean, who wants to be? I mean, suddenly I was Dwight Schrute being a beet farmer, And who wants to do that?
Well, I think, and beets don't break. It's really hard to break a beet in the washer. But that's a great example. And I use the example of broccoli and kale, which are very identical crops, and, they, pretty much the same same planting spacing and fertility, spray schedule, all those kind of things. But the difference in profitability between the two is dramatic. Broccoli, you probably won't even get one head per plant, and that's in a good pick. And yet kale, you might get 3 to 4 bunches per plant. The difference being is that the kale is so much more profitable than broccoli, and yet there's much more market demand for broccoli. And so just because people may be screaming for broccoli or carrots or, say, sweet corn, doesn't mean that we should be growing it if it's not profitable. And, granted, with your carrots and beets example, it's great that you have both, but if carrots were unprofitable, then you have to either raise the price or lower expenses, or, I would just say stop growing it if you can't do that.
Growing them, yeah.
And the whole thing about, people say, well, I do it as a loss leader. And, I really challenge people on the loss leader concept, because if you're intentionally trying to lose money or knowingly lose money, you had better be really having an effect on the sales of the things that are making money, because otherwise it's a downward spiral. And you should look at that loss leader as, maybe more of a promotional cost of advertising, or, maybe better spent on radio ads or, newspaper ads or whatever. But that's more of a cost of doing business. For you to bring something to market that is a loss leader, and then it sells out by 9 o'clock at market, the next 4 hours, it's not doing any good. It's just a hole in your business operation. I make the analogy of, if you're in a canoe at one end of a lake and you're trying to get to the other, and you have, a paddle in one hand and a portable drill with a drill bit on the end of it. And, you take one paddle, and then you take your drill and you drill a hole in the bottom of your boat. Then you take another paddle and you drill another hole in the bottom of your boat. It's really simple. Just drop the drill, put both hands on the paddle, and you'll get to where you want to go so much quicker. And, if you can plug those leaks up, your business all of a sudden starts floating, and you have more money to invest in your infrastructure. You have more money to pay yourself, to pay your employees. It's just such a win-win situation. And the only downside is you have to do a little math,
Okay. So, but Richard, I mean, you know this, and I mean, you and I both make a portion of our living going out and talking to people about record keeping and, and math. And those are hard things to do when you're already working 80 hours a week.
That's true. And, truth be told, I don't like record keeping any more than anybody else. And that kind of sounds strange coming from a guy that, talks about it and talks and wrote a book about it. But I only keep records to the extent that I need to, so that I can enjoy the life that I do by making more money, doing what I love to do, farming. And so I've kind of really come to, and I think you do the same thing, is to promote taking fewer numbers, but, very good numbers. And so I, always advise people to say, instead of, sometimes when I give a workshop, people get so excited about taking care of their financial destiny. They go home, they say, great, I'm going to start tracking everything I do all day long, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and I'm going to track everything every one of my employees does. And so they do that, and, thinking that that's going to be their salvation for financial success. And by doing that, they get these reams of paperwork, and then at the end of the year, they start looking at it. Some is incomplete and it's kind of disjointed, and it gets overwhelming. And all of a sudden, the whole process stops, and they throw their arms up in frustration. And that's not the intended result. And so, what I do now is say, just focus on, again, the top 5 sellers of your business. Don't go too whole hog, and compare those, and focus on the rates that it takes to do things. So the biggest thing in a crop budget that is missing is the labor that happens during the season. All the other things, like buying the beet seed or carrot seed and the fertilizers and the remay and the bags that they're going to get shipped in, all those things have a paper trail. You can easily figure that out. But what you don't have a record of, and very hardly anybody has a record of, is how long it actually takes you to seed the crop, weed the crop, cultivate the crop, irrigate it, harvest it, and pack out. And those are the numbers you need to do in season. And say the most complicated thing would be if you had weekly plantings of salad mix, 22 different plantings every single week, and you wanted to track the profitability of that or do a crop budget. You could say, well, I'm going to track, planting 1, planting 2, planting 3, planting 4. Instead of doing that, you just take 2 plantings, one in the beginning, one in the middle of the season, and you just see how long it takes to seed it, write it down, and then see how long it takes to weed it, how much to pick it, how much to wash, and how much to bag it. And so then you do that, you check it again, and then maybe a third time. And those rates, I can almost, unless the pick is really bad, those rates are going to be very similar. And once you do that, you don't have to track all 22 plantings. You have a pretty good idea of what your rates are for washing, packing, harvesting, and weeding. And
right.
Then you have some cogent information, and it doesn't take that long. And a lot of information that you take, say, for every budget, which might be, pre-plant disking and fertilizing and bed prep, those are going to be the same no matter what you plant. So a lot of the work is just in the things that are crop specific, which is weeding and picking and pack. And those usually are the biggest numbers that affect a budget, surprisingly. The ones that we don't know anything about are the things that affect the budget the most, which are, usually weeding and harvest and pack out. And the other thing that affects the budget the most is the price of that yield. So a small increase in the price, if a 10% increase in the sales price directly translates to an increase in your net profit, because all expenses remaining the same, you've just, with a little pen or a keystroke on your keyboard, all of a sudden made another $10,000 on, 5 acres. So
it's pretty amazing how that works. And I think it's that pricing piece is something that I think a lot of folks underestimate. You talked earlier about selling out at farmers market, and my attitude was always that if I sold out at farmers market, I was basically leaving money on the table, because that meant I could have charged a higher price for every unit that I sold, because I still had to be at farmers market for another 3 hours after selling out of something at 9 o'clock. And there was just no sense in doing that.
That's true. Or you could have brought more. I mean, I don't want to be a capitalist pig dog shyster and charge an arm and a leg so it's only the very wealthy can afford my produce. I think we all want to have our produce affordable to everyone, and yet we still want to make money. I mean, that's the win-win. And that's a hard, position to be in sometimes. But I guess, again, it's the internal knowledge of your own farm business to know what is making money that allows you to still price things in the marketplace that isn't that far off and still make money. Kale is a great example. And again, kale, even at $2 a bunch, you are going to probably net, $15,000 an acre on kale, and $2 a bunch is probably cheaper than the commercial grocery store down the street.
I'm buying it for $2.50 right now.
So exactly. So, those kind of things, that internal knowledge of your own business allows you to make decisions that will shape your business in a much more profitable way.
So, Richard, how did you end up getting into the business side of things? Because it sounds like you, like most of us that got into this business, didn't get in because you enjoyed the bookkeeping. You didn't get in because you wanted to be a pencil pusher. You got in because you like growing vegetables. And at some point, you became, essentially the business guru of the market farming world. So how did that happen?
Well, I got kind of dragged in kicking and screaming into the business world only out of sheer necessity and frustration. But once I did get dragged into the business world, a light bulb went off on me and said, wow, now I get it. And the reason that happened was because when I first started out at Cate Farm here, I was a 5% owner in a partnership of 5 individuals. And so basically I rented the farm from that partnership and I paid an annual rent, but I could, make or lose any money in my sole proprietorship independently. And that allowed me to grow my business without this huge mortgage over my head. And, after 12 years of doing that, I actually had a track record. I had, substantial sales and a proven business. And so then I could go to the bank and I borrowed $190,000 to buy the other partners out at that point. That's when I read the rubber met the road in terms of, finances, because not only did I have to prove to the loan officer that I could pay the money back, but more importantly, I had to prove it to myself because I was putting everything on the line. And if I screwed up, I lost the farm, which was, blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of hopes and dreams. And so that's when I really said, okay, I need to figure out how to do this. And it was, the same time I'd taken a holistic management course, which kind of opened my eyes to a lot of different things. And it was then that I realized that I didn't have these numbers that I needed, these numbers in season. And that's when I started to keep the crop journal. And it's really the most important book on my farm. And it's just most rudimentary book too. It's like all it is a pocket folder with some loose leaf paper in it. And I just have a page for each crop. And so when I, seed the beets, I just write seeded, 1/10 of an acre of beets in, half an hour. And then I went, I might not go into the beet field for another 2 weeks, and then I'll go and I'll run the baskets over it, and I'll say, cultivated with baskets, half an hour, 45 minutes, and I keep doing that, and that's everything that I do on that beet field is in one page. It's not a lot. It's just done over the whole season. And that's what the information that I needed to actually figure out how much was making money and what wasn't, because those were the actual costs that were going into the crop budget. So that's what kind of got me into thinking that way. But then back, at that time, this is 1993, that I was growing 43 different crops, and I rated them in terms of profitability. So I did an enterprise budget for each one of them, and I rated it in terms of profitability. And most all were positive, but some were much more positive than others. And so what I did, I just kind of went halfway down the list, and I just drew a line through it, and I stopped growing the bottom half, kept growing the top half, the more profitable ones. And all of a sudden, my net income rose dramatically for doing, and anybody on the outside looking at my business said, well, Richard's not doing anything different. He's still going to a farmer's stand. He's still going to farmer's market, has a CSA, ships to deep root, does a lot of wholesaling. You wouldn't really see it on the outside, but it was my crop selection that determined, how profitable I became. And it was like, that's when the light bulb started going off and go like, wow. And all of a sudden I realized you can make some pretty good money doing this. And there's a few things that, people would say, well, how come you don't have sweet corn at farmer's market or CSA or peas and beans or some of the things that I actually dropped? And, I explained to people, I said, sweet corn, I love sweet corn, but, you can only gross, $1,200 an acre. And, to keep it weed free, it's going to cost, a certain amount. And then right before I pick it, the crows come in, the raccoons come in, the deer come in, and my neighbors are picking it as well. So,
Right.
it's kind of, it was a loser. And I said, listen, I cannot make money growing corn, and I can't do that. I go buy corn from my neighbor, and I encourage you to do the same. Most CSA members in farmers market go to the store to buy avocados and coffee and chocolate and other things that you can't grow up here, and so
Right.
they would have to buy it somewhere else. And explaining to your customer is having that ability to have that audience is a huge thing, because they say, sure, I hear you, and they're great, and they're very happy with their lettuce and spinach and tomatoes and everything else that they're getting.
So you mentioned deep root co-op, and I think this is a hard thing to capture too when you're doing cost of production. Is it when we've got a market farm, you've essentially got this big vertically integrated operation, right? You're growing your own transplants, which is one way of doing business. You're growing stuff out in the field, and that's got a whole nother set of costs and structure to it on kind of that per acre or per square foot basis. And then you've got the washing and the packing. Out in California, all these are handled by different elements when you're on a very large farm in California. And then you turn around and do the sales, and you're talking about selling through a farmer's market to a CSA and through Deep Root. Deep Root, is it Deep Root Co-op?
Deep Root Organic Co-op is a growers co-op that's been around since 1985, and it's growers in Vermont and some over the border in Quebec now that pool. We started to form the co-op back in the 80s, so we would ship produce out of state so we wouldn't compete with each other, but we would satisfy the needs in Boston, New York, and Washington, or the Eastern Seaboard. And so we would take produce out of Vermont to basically, so we wouldn't compete in state for the same marketplace. And it's a great model for doing business, because you collaborate, you look at a market need for what the Boston market might need through their bigger stores like Whole Foods, and say, okay, they need 4 pallets of green leaf a week. Who's going to grow it? And so, okay, Chris, you grow it in June, I grow it in July, and another farmer grows it in August. And we cooperatively kind of put our efforts into doing that, and then cooperatively take a percentage of sales to pay for a manager and trucking, and now we even have our own warehouse that we've paid for. So it's a great model for selling. It does take some time in terms of running a co-op, just because you have different people in it. There is that's the one, I wouldn't call it downside, but you have to spend time managing the business.
And of course, it's a scale thing too. When you're running a co-op like that, you're obviously not selling to, say, the food co-op in Montpelier, which is, you could, relatively,
and they do, but they don't.
Right.
They don't do it to take business away from their own members, obviously.
And it's obviously not your only market either. You're taking this to a much larger. Like you said, you're heading out of Vermont, which has a population of 600,000
people. Total in Vermont, and Deep Root can ship 2 or 3 tractor trailer loads a week, down into the Boston market. That's a lot.
Which probably has 2 or 3 million people, right, in the Boston market?
That I'm not positive.
Okay.
Deep Root sales are like 2.5 million a year. But you don't have to be. You can be a grower of any size at all, or your number of crops or just one crop. It doesn't make any difference.
Okay.
We all work together.
So is that how long has that been around?
Since 1985. So that's coming on 30 years. And, the thing about marketing is, I think, farmers markets are kind of sexier because you're out there, dealing with a customer one-on-one. Same thing with CSAs. The farmers, are kind of the, sometimes the rock star of the community, and they get more recognition in that retail aspect. But if you were to look at your business and see how much money you're spending on your marketing as a percentage of gross, or as even per acre basis, it's going to be dramatic. It's going to be a dramatic difference, or it'll just be eye-opening to see how much money you actually spend on marketing. So if you were to pay yourself $12 or $15 an hour to set up and staff a CSA and pack it up, plus all the time that you do promoting it and getting members, or all the time that you go to farmers market. So you load up the farmers market, you attend for 4 hours, come back, it's an 8-hour day, maybe 2 people, you add up all those hours. Generally, you don't add them up because you're not paying yourself and you don't count them. But, if you break a leg or have to get called off for a wedding or a funeral or something, you do have to pay somebody, and that's a real cost of doing business. And farmers should figure that their time is worth as much as their crew rate, at least, I would think. So, there is a cost of doing business. And so if you're to look at all your different marketing channels, whether farmers market, CSA, farm stand, or wholesale, it's going to cost you something. And, the wholesale, you might not get the same sales price, but pretty much you're talking about a 30-second phone call and either delivery or get picked up at your door. That's your only cost. So you might get 20% less for that service, but in the end, it might be a wash if you were to sell it at a higher price with a higher marketing costs.
Which is, of course, why a grocery store charges more money to sell produce at retail than they pay you for the produce that they're buying from you at wholesale.
That's right. And that's just, that's the way the world works. And, as long as everybody on the food chain is happy, so the producer can sell at a price that they make money to a store that can buy it and still mark it up so the consumer can still feel like it's affordable food, everybody wins, and that's the goal. I mean, I'm a cooperative person, and I'm bullish on farming, and I'd like to see everyone succeed. And part of that's, working together, but also just understanding that, we as farmers have to see the end, that we have to live in a world that the consumer can still afford, or will still buy the food, not afford it, that they will still purchase that product at the end. And, we shouldn't blame the middle person to say, oh, they mark it up 40%, and that's why we can't make any money. No, that's just the way the world works, and part of the cost of doing business.
Richard, I'm going to break in here for a quick word from our sponsors. The Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you today by Haas Tools. Haas Tools is the complete solution for all your market farming tools and supplies. Keep rows weed-free with their time-tested American-made wheel hose and the best wheel hoe attachments. Their precision seeders have a proven seed plate design for planting a wide variety of seeds, and you can grow the best transplants with their heavy-duty PropTech seed trays and keep your crops healthy with their drip irrigation and fertilizer injection systems. Haas also provides a comprehensive selection of conventional and OMRI-certified pest control products at the most affordable prices. Free shipping, outstanding customer service. Shop online or request a free catalog at HaasTools.com. And by Local Food Marketplace. Are you trying to scale up without the right systems? Instead of juggling email and text orders, spreadsheets for harvest, packing, and delivery, and a separate invoicing system, Local Food Marketplace's software platform will help your farm automate these tasks and decrease errors with its fully integrated system for online orders, inventory management, order packing, invoicing, and payment processing. Easily configure the system for managing multiple sales channels, customer types, price levels, and delivery routes. The platform also offers lot number traceability and an option to collaboratively sell products with other producers. Contact them via their website, localfoodmarketplace.com, to schedule a free consultation on how Local Food Marketplace can help you efficiently manage customer orders from the pack house to your customer's doorstep. I'd like to circle back to holistic management. You mentioned that you took a holistic management course, I think, in 1993,
Yep.
and there was a lot going on in the early 90s with holistic management. I know a lot of people out here in the Midwest were taking classes and going into some deeper training at that time. I think it was very popular in the Northeast. And you said that influenced how you were looking at your farm as a business, in addition to being a lifestyle enterprise. And I wonder if would you consider yourself to be a holistic management practitioner?
I wouldn't say I'm an active manager. I still use the concept, so I guess yes and no. But the whole thing about the holistic management is that it was a different way of kind of looking at my business. And I think the first thing that changed for me was to go through a process of setting a holistic goal of something that was value-based, where it met my core principles and addressed them and said, this is what I want to do. And then you address it. How are you going to do it? What kind of, how are you going to structure your business in order to meet these goals? My goal, had nothing to do with farming. It had to do with, having a economic security with a family that's, with family around, and being able to have time to do other things that were enriching to my life. It had nothing to do with farming. But then, another part of this goal is that, okay, well, how are you going to achieve this goal? And my vehicle was through farming. And so then I figured, well, how am I going to do this through, how am I going to make this happen through farming? And that's, again, when I started, kind of crunching numbers to see how I was going to be able to support this. And, it's a very good, I recommend it to anyone to look into holistic management. It's, a different way of looking at the biological systems and the economic systems. And they have ways of, kind of testing decision making to see if it covers, the social and economic and environmental aspects that are always there, but sometimes don't get addressed.
That whole idea, I think holistic management calls it the testing questions, is something that I've run into in a number of different formats. I've had a lot to do with nonprofit organizations over the years, and they've got, which means you have to do strategy sessions. And one of the things that has come out of that work in recent years, to a large degree, is having a set of questions that you always ask about any decision. And I really like that idea in holistic management, kind of having these. Always be aware of, I think it's 7 things, and I can't rattle them off the top of my head, but when I went through the holistic management training in the late 90s, that became an important part of kind of forcing myself into that mode of thinking for a couple of years, helped me to be more aware of those questions without having to whip out my note card and look at those 7 questions every time. Those are kind of always things that are sort of integrated in the way you think about what am I going to do and how am I going to do it?
That's right. And I think that's one of the nice benefit of the whole holistic management training is, getting that broader view of everything that needs to get addressed.
Was that something that a lot of people were doing in Vermont in the 1990s? Is that, did you find out here, it seems to have, in the Midwest, it seems to have shifted the way whole groups of people were thinking about their farm operations and their involvement in the community and the importance of kind of developing to use the holistic management language, to developing a resource base that was going to support them into the future. Was that something that you saw also happening in Vermont?
I think in the early 90s, there was definitely an uptick in the number of people that were, interested in holistic management. But, again, I haven't kept abreast with what's going on, so I don't know if the level is the same. But there was, like in the 90s, there's a lot of people that were signing on and incorporating it into their business practice, and it still happens now. So again, I'm not one to speak, if it's still as popular as it was.
Okay. So you said that it sounds like in the last, probably 10 to 15 years, there have been a lot of changes on your farm, kind of moving out of the CSA into more of a farmer's market and wholesale model, now moving out of the farmer's market to where you're not just selling to deep roots, right? You're doing deep roots and then I assume direct deliveries to stores and restaurants in your area?
Correct. So basically we sell to deep root fall crops during the fall and winter, and then we have the local co-op and stores that we sell seedlings and tomatoes to and greens locally. And then we don't do any retail anymore except for some plant sales in the spring when we open up our greenhouses on the weekend in May, just to so local people can come and buy plants if they want to without us delivering them to retail locations. And that's worked out. That kind of model has worked out well for us. The CSA, again, we had a CSA going for 6 years in the 90s and really loved it. It was a huge, I think it's one of the greatest business models for selling things. But for us, it necessitated growing everything all the time. And that's why when we stopped to do that, we ended up, saying, well, maybe the CSA model is not what we want to be pursuing right now. Now, I mean, even back then, there was multi-farm CSAs, which I think, work great, because that way you don't have to grow everything all the time. You can specialize in fewer crops and become very good and efficient at doing that. And so, you might even have farms that, can be profitable growing the things that I found that were unprofitable just because of either scale or technologies that allow them to do that. And the farmers market is, I think it was hard for us to shift after 25 years of going to farmers market. It was actually hard for us to stop just because, it was part of our being, and we have customers that, we've been seeing weekly for 25 years. It was a hard decision to make. And I miss that, but I also like my Saturday mornings.
It was one of the biggest changes in my life when I stopped doing farmers market and had those Saturdays back. It was like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, it's not only Saturdays, it's all day Friday picking, all day Saturday loading, unloading, vending, loading, unloading. And so by Saturday afternoon, I was exhausted. And so, even though there might be dinner parties or whatever to go to, we'd just be tired. Or you end up doing a lot of chit chat at farmers market. That the last thing you want to do on a Saturday night is be doing more of that. So for me, it's all good. I enjoy doing it, but I do enjoy having some more free time just in general by not doing as much. And again, I'm just getting older, Chris. It's what happens. Well, it's okay.
It happens. It happens, and things change. And it's interesting because I think that you're. Well, again, I feel like I'm seeing more and more farms kind of following that lead. People that have kind of followed that arc through, intensive retail only to doing retail and some wholesale, and then actually gradually backing out of the retail. And I'm always interested if that's something that's indicative of the changes in the marketplace, a maturation of the food system, or if that does have more to do with simply getting older and having changes in priorities and changes in energy levels.
Well, I think farmers market is a lot more. That's the retail aspect of a farmers market is much more energy intensive, or it just takes more energy to do than if you have a farm stand. There's plenty of farms in Vermont, all over the place, that are multi-generational because they've developed a business, and it's an easier way of retailing than to basically set up a store every Saturday or 2 or 3 times a week to basically move, set up, unpack, and all that. And so I don't know if it necessarily has to do with age. I think it has to do with your situation. If you have an ability to have a farm stand, if you have a good location on a roadside or whatever, that would work fine. And if we had a farm stand location that was on a busy road, that's probably what we'd be doing and still be doing it.
Right. So just to take a different tack from the marketing and talking about the financial side of things, I had somebody ask me recently how, and I didn't have a good answer for this, so I'm going to put this on you. And this was when you've got too many things to do on the farm. And the example that this woman gave is, I've got to get crops harvested for farmers market tomorrow, but I also need to cultivate the carrots because today is the day that's the right day to get that done. How do you make decisions in a scarce resource environment? And I think you're probably having less of that now, but you certainly have, 30 years of experience with that up until now, with, being pulled in multiple directions at once, having to satisfy both tomorrow's needs as well as the needs for a crop that's going to be ready to harvest 2 months from now. How do you decide what to do on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis?
That's a great question. And the reality is, especially with farming, unless you just don't bite off as much, you're never going to get everything done. You're always going to have a to-do list that can be never ending. And by the time you finish something off, you're adding 3 more at the bottom of it. And so the idea is that, well, a few things. One is effective management is basically getting the most important things done first and following through to make sure they get done. And part of that involves just, it seems so simple, right? All you do is you take all the things you have to do, you prioritize them in the order that they have to get, top to bottom priority, and just start going down the list, doing the most top priority things first, and just keep working down as you do it. Unfortunately, sometimes there's not enough hours in a day to get that done, or the week to do that. And so you either have to hire more people in, or you just have to make some sacrifices saying, well, we're not going to get to the weeding to the carrots. That said, there's a lot of things that, are not on that, the to-do list that have to get done, but things that should get done, which might be long-term planning or looking at, how to, be more efficient at certain things. It actually takes some, maybe half a day of a meeting with your crew or your spouse to talk about some deeper issues, but we're too busy, weeding the carrots or getting ready for market. And so a lot of times I find it helpful to map out your work week to saying, okay, certain things in your work week are pretty dictated already. If you have a Saturday farmer's market, you're spending Saturday at farmer's market, you're spending Friday picking. If you're doing wholesale, you're going to be picking Monday and Thursday for Tuesday, Friday deliveries, say. You might reserve Sunday afternoon or Sunday as a day off. So all of a sudden your calendar on your week starts to get blocked out with things that you're already having to do. So it's good to see that. And so then you only may have, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Fridays to do the farm work that you need. And so you plan that out and say, okay, well, these are the days that we have to do all our planting, all our weeding, and all our irrigating, or whatever it might be. And by doing that, by having that kind of calendar base, then you might just, it's a matter of staffing to say, okay, well, if, one crew person's going to be delivering, I'll need 2 to be picking on that same day. I'll need to have some more people in here to do the things that need to get done. And, labor management's a tough one because sometimes it rains for 3 days and, we don't have enough things to do. And that's a challenge. But I think in terms of not having enough things to do, having too many things to do, then it's a matter of either hiring in people to do that, or doing less, or putting off things that you can, like fixing a slow leak in your tire until wintertime. And so you just end up pumping it up once a week or something like that. Not the most efficient thing, but you can do that till you have more time. And, obviously when you hire somebody, the goal is you have too much work that you can do. So you think that when you hire somebody, you're going to be able to get this exact same, you'll get twice as much done by having somebody work. But generally that's not the case because you have to train them, and they might not do it the same way you did it. But even still, you will get more done. And the thing about employee management, as I'm sure you're aware, Chris, is that, it takes time. And that a lot of times when I have people working for me, I don't get the things done that I want to because I'm making sure that they have all the things in place for them to do their job.
It really is. I think a lot of times with we think of employees as being, well, if you do a classic organization chart, employees end up being underneath us as farmers. And I almost think it's almost a more effective visualization to put yourself on the bottom, holding up your employees, because that's a lot of what you end up doing. That is making sure that they've got what they need.
That's right. And and because you want to make sure they're not hung up with a missing part or not having enough bands to bunch the broccoli or whatever it might be, unless you assign that job, that's your job, is overall management of the farm. In fact, the farmer's job really is to make sure your farm succeeds financially and ecologically and socially. But, if you look at your farm job as a manager, that's what you do. If you don't do your job well, then your farm fails and you don't have any farm anymore. And that's why I promote the business end, is because that's really your job one as a farmer, is to make sure your business succeeds or you don't have a farm anymore. And so employee management the same way, is that you want to make sure that your employees are doing productive work for their paid time. And paid time is work time, and you'd like to pay them as much as possible so they can make a living wage, as long as you can still make your farm finances work so you can make a living wage. Win-win.
Which Which again, I think is one of those points. If you really have an understanding of your cost of production, that actually puts you in a better position as a, if we wanted to call it a social justice perspective, to really be able to maximize what you're providing back to your employees in compensation for their labor. Whereas if you don't know what your costs are, you're stuck in a reactive mode of always having to squeeze down on those rates of pay as much as possible because you're not certain that what you've got those employees doing is actually yielding a return that's going to be enough to be able to compensate them for their time.
That's a very good point. And I think a couple of things. One is that labor is often the single largest item in your expense budget. It could be a third or maybe 40% of your gross sales. And, that's a chunk of change. That doesn't mean that you should pay people less. And, it doesn't mean that you should do anything differently. You just acknowledge the fact that, okay, well, farming is a labor intensive business. That's fine. The other thing is, if a farmer is not looking at their business as much as could be, and they're not paying themselves that much, the last thing they're going to do is pay somebody else, want to feel generous in paying somebody else. It's when the farmer starts understanding that they can make money farming, that's when they can say, oh, I'm happy to share that with my employees who work hard for the success of the farm. And so it's hard to, to have a farmer, who's struggling to say, sure, I'll pay everybody a living wage when he's not even paying him or herself a living wage.
So what have you found in your years of having, I assume, a wide variety of types of people and personalities working on your farm? What have you found to be the best ways to increase the effectiveness of your employees? Because that's obviously the other thing is, for you would like to get as much out of them in terms of output as possible for every dollar that you're putting into it, regardless of what your rate of pay is.
I think a lot of it's communication and the basic understanding that they get paid by the hour. I mean, they could get paid by the piece, but we pay by the hour. And so they get paid by the hour, but we get paid by the piece. We get paid for every head of cabbage that gets sold or every carrot that gets sold, and that difference between getting paid by the piece and getting paid by the hour, the understanding is that there are certain rates that employees, that everybody does to maintain so that we can get paid by the piece and still make money so they can make their paycheck and that we can pay them. And so understanding that paid time is work time, that there's certain levels of production, that these certain rates are expected because we need to make it work. And once you start doing crop budgets and realizing you need to be able to pick 7 bushels of carrots in an hour, because that's what you've been basing it on, you can convey that to your crew and say, hey, listen, we need to, we'd like to be able to pick 7 bushels of carrots an hour, because that's what, otherwise the whole thing doesn't work, and people understand that and they say, sure. And they might even be challenged to pick 8, or pick more. And if it's a bad pick, they might only pick 6. That's okay. But they understand that's the nature of the exchange.
I like that. And that's another advantage. This is something I found with record keeping in general, is that usually you can leverage it to get more out of it than what you think you're going to get out of it. So you go in saying, I'm going to do a crop budget, and you also end up with a management tool. You end up with something to be able to say to people, this is the rate that is the standard for Cate Farm, or the standard for Rock Spring Farm is this many bunches of kale an hour, this many bushels of carrots an hour. And that's a good management tool for being able to establish those expectations with people.
That's true. And besides that, that's a good point that, that's a benefit of doing crop budgets, or an ancillary benefit. The other benefit is that, managerially, I tend to have employees work in blocks. And so instead of having 4 different people do 4 different things, I have 4 people all weed carrots, and then they say, okay, 4 people times 2 hours is 8 hours, and then they move on to weeding the beets, and they record. One person's recording this, and so it's easier to track time because everybody's working, together, or you have two teams of two, say, doing the same thing. One person's responsible for weeding, and that's a direct effect of having crop budgets instead of just because you're pooling everybody together. Plus, I think it's more fun to work together for the most part if there's enough work to do.
Perennial support for the Farmer to Farmer podcast is brought to you by Vermont Compost Company, helping plants make sugar from sunshine since 1992. Through 23 years of producing the best potting soils you can buy, Vermont Compost Company founder and owner Carl Hammer has stayed intimately involved in the company, working with a small staff of committed individuals to provide compost-based potting soils chock full of microbial partners and humus-bound nutrients. The people at Vermont Compost Company have a practical understanding of the challenges organic growers face, and combine that with a comprehensive understanding of soil and plant science and intuitive comprehension that often has Carl and his crew sticking their noses into a handful of compost and inhaling deeply. Like the donkey on their logo, Vermont Compost potting soils aren't glitzy or glamorous. They're steadfast and consistent, stubbornly making certain that your transplants can get everything they need from a few cubic centimeters of soil. Oh, and the donkeys, they're the real thing. And you get a little bit of donkey manure in every batch of Vermont Compost potting soil. Feed your plants the best. VermontCompost.com. Well, Richard, so something new that we're trying to do, and I probably should have given you a heads up about this at the beginning of the show, but I didn't. I apologize for that. Is to have 3 questions at the end that we'd like to ask every one of the guests here on the show, and so the first one of these is tell us what's your favorite tool on the farm. If you had to spend the rest of your life on a desert island with just one tool, what would it be?
Boy, that is like such a hard question. You should have given me like 5 days to think about that, Chris.
Sorry, Richard.
Well, boy, that is a tough one. A desert island wouldn't be a good
no,
example,
it wouldn't.
But of the things
you knew what I meant.
That I really like that save a lot of, or that are very cost effective. I think, one would be a trolley for the greenhouse moving around the plants. I think the other tool that I really like, if I can say two, would be a mini chisel plow, which are these things that just kind of rip, 12 to 14 inches of soil underneath where the plant is going to be planted. Those are probably some of my one ground tool and one greenhouse tool. Okay. I'm going to think about that though, and I'll call you back in a week.
We'll have the Richard Wiswall supplemental.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so the next question is what would you tell if yourself now could tell yourself when you started farming one thing that would have made a difference? What would you go back and tell that beginning self?
I think one of the things about everyone starting out is that I think maybe they want to achieve a certain level of either farming or production, quicker than I think might be able. And so, at least for me, and maybe other people don't bite off too much, but for me, I feel like I was trying to do too much. And School of Hard Knocks is a very expensive school, but very effective school by, making mistakes. As long as you don't make the same mistake twice, you're doing fine. But I think, I see farmers, starting out now that they want to, do a lot of things and just say, okay, well, this is, maybe just look at what you think you can do and pare it down. You can always, there's always next year, if you feel like you're bored, have time on your hand.
Well, and if you got, I think too, if you got it right, if you got it right this year, now you can get it right next year.
And I guess
instead of always being behind the curve.
The other answer to that question would be to just think it through to the end when you do something. So if you're thinking of a new enterprise, just think about it. And again, a pencil on the back of an envelope, just to kind of rough out the big picture finances, just to get a sense of it before you start jumping in it. You'll save a lot of time.
Okay. And finally, what would be your favorite resource? I mean, when you run up against a problem on the farm, where do you turn for information?
Well, I grew up before Google. I grew up before personal computers, and so I think
this is a question that probably only works for people that are my age and older.
Right.
You know,
but no, but
Yeah.
I mean, but even so, even with the access to the internet, one of our great things here in Vermont is the Veg and Berry Growers Association has a listserv that, professional growers all throughout New England, read. And so if I have a question about, grafting tomatoes or something that I couldn't really find maybe online somewhere else, I just ask other growers, or what's their favorite kale substitute variety or something for winter boar. And then, you'll get a lot of different answers from a lot of professionals that, I think that's one of the biggest resources. And Vern Grubinger, I must say, is one of those resources in Vermont that we're very lucky to have. He's a UVM extension agent and just a tremendous clearinghouse of information. So I would say that resource kind of is probably the biggest help as a farmer.
So what is your alternative for winter boar kale with this hybrid kale crisis that we're in right now?
Broccoli. I don't have an answer to that.
All right. Great. Richard, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much.
It's been great talking, Chris.
Okay. And happy spring.
Same to you. Okay.
Bye. All right. So wrapping things up here, I'll say again that this was episode 154 of the Farmer to Farmer podcast. You can find the notes for this show at farmertofarmerpodcast.com by looking on the episodes page or just searching for Wiswall 2. That's WISWALL 2. The transcript for this episode is brought to you by Earth Tools, offering the most complete selection of walk-behind farming equipment and high-quality garden tools in North America. And by Osborne Quality Seeds, a dedicated partner for growers. Visit osborneseed.com for high-quality seed, industry-leading customer service, and fast order fulfillment. Additional funding for transcripts is provided by North Central SARE, providing grants and education to advance innovations in sustainable agriculture. You can get the show notes for every Farmer to Farmer podcast right in your inbox by signing up for my email newsletter at farmertofarmerpodcast.com. Also, please head on over to iTunes, leave us a review if you enjoy the show, or talk to us in the show notes, or tell your friends on Facebook. We're at Purple Pitchfork on Facebook. And hey, when you talk to our sponsors, please let them know how much you appreciate their support of a resource you value. You can support the show directly by going to farmertofarmerpodcast.com/donate. Thank you to everybody that's done that here this month in January. And I'm working to make the best farming podcast in the world. You can help. Finally, and this is helping too here, please let me know who you would like to hear from on the show through the suggestions form at farmertofarmerpodcast.com, and I will do my best to get them on the show. Thank you for listening. Be safe out there and keep the tractor running.